She just wanted to get rid of him.
Well, he was passed out drunk, and she murdered him while he was drunk. And I actually used, based on a discussion I had a year previously with my father-in-law, on something called the din of a road, Dave, that if someone's threatening your life, you have to protect your own life, even if that means taking them out.
Thank you for coming on.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
I know this isn't your first rodeo. You're definitely more experienced than me with the cameras and all that. So thank you for coming on. So Leonard, for those who may not know you, will you share a little bit about your upbringing and like a bit of your family background?
Okay, well, I grew up in Johannesburg, and I think the most relevant aspect of my upbringing to share, other than, you know, coming from a nice family and all of that, is that I had a very difficult childhood, and especially with learning difficulties. Yeah. And as a consequence, I always felt like an outsider. And so I think I started observing the world from an outsider perspective from a very early age. And relying on those observations at school, particularly primary school, where I can say teachers were exceptionally abusive. Wow. In the 60s, nothing anyone would get away with today. And also, you know, with learning difficulties, because school is so one-dimensional, everything that I like about myself and everything that people appreciate about me were the things growing up that made me feel alien, outside, almost like a freak.
Yeah.
And so that really influenced my perspective in terms of understanding what it means to be an outsider. But also I've developed an approach called appreciative witnessing, which is really about how people are made to feel included and how people are, in a sense, given themselves through the way other people mirror them and respond to them. And this has informed my entire psychological approach, which is centered around the concept of shalom. And so everything I do, whether it's grief or abuse or anything that I do, the overarching theoretical structure is shalom. And I think my sensitivity to that came from living in such a fragmented world, growing up, but then also encountering my father-in-law, who was Rabbi Goldfein, and his main theme was shalom. And so it just made sense to me, you know, that should, it makes sense now, should I say, that became my overarching way of seeing the world.
Was there a specific point in your life where you remember like this light bulb moment of like, I want to be a therapist and help other people not feel like an outsider and help them feel like they belong?
Well, it wasn't a light bulb moment of wanting to be a therapist, because I didn't really think I was going to be anything.
Really? Wow.
And the one thing that I really loved in childhood was the radio. We're talking about the 60s. I was in grade 11 when TV came to the country. And particularly the English service. And that's where I developed a love of language. And I listened to the radio a lot. And actually a light bulb moment was when one of the teachers at primary school, who wasn't my teacher, she was just a teacher, said to me, you should go on to radio, you've got the right voice for radio. And that was a light bulb moment in the sense that it gave me a perspective that I could be more than what anyone else had thought or suggested that I was ever going to be.
Wow. So was that the only teacher you felt like kind of believed in you and said, you know, you can actually be something?
And then in high school, an English teacher, but also my late grandmother, who, you know, was a refugee from Lithuania. She was a very intelligent woman, and So she had a library of philosophical books, and also Russian literature, like Dostoevsky. And I found, amongst her books, a book by Alfred Adler, who was one of Freud's major disciples. And that book, I read it when I was about 14. That was a light bulb moment in terms of loving psychology.
Okay.
And then I only decided, actually, I did a legal BA. I thought I could go into law. And then I also majored in psychology. And it was only at the end of my BA that I decided that psychology was the route that I wanted to take.
Wow, amazing. I didn't know that about you. It's quite amazing to think like now you're so successful, and I would never think that like you struggled as a child, especially since you did, a psychology degree and all of that. So the fact that, you struggled in school, I mean, I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Well, I think struggle is the secret of success.
Yeah.
Because if you have it easy, you don't really develop the resources and the capacity.
Yeah. Also, someone once said to me that if you look at all organizations, like say the Deal Link or any of those kind of things, they all start with someone struggling and saying, I need to make a difference and do something.
That's
I mean,
right.
even my podcast, I wouldn't have been doing this if I didn't go through my own journey. So yeah, I think it also helps people see that, struggle can be turned into something positive. And yeah, it's amazing to see that. Yeah. And then what made you go into, did you always want to help people with relationships? Was that something you were always passionate about, or did it kind of slowly happen?
Well, one's journey in psychology is influenced actually by the school that you get accepted to do a clinical master's. And the school that I thought I wanted to go to, it was very individual orientated, very psychoanalytically orientated. The school I got into was family therapy and marital therapy orientated and systemic thinking, which I'm extremely grateful for. And so that sort of set me on the path of not only being interested in relationships, but because it was systemic thinking, I see everything as relationship with oneself, relationship with particular emotions. Everything in creation is in relationship, and Shalom is about relationship.
So you've been involved in very high profile cases, specifically the Oscar Pistorius trial. What was that like?
It was actually very taxing, if you want to know the truth, from a lot of points of view. First of all, the Oscar channel was at night.
Okay.
So
was it live?
It was live. I had to go to TV studios every night that I was called. I had TV crews coming to my office. Once I was running out, and something had happened in the trial, and a TV crew just arrived at my house without warning, and I said, I can't go back to my office, I'm in a hurry. They interviewed me in the garden. I'm not actually someone who enjoys attention and public exposure, which sounds crazy because I've had
so
2
much
radio shows, and
Yeah.
I've written, for the newspaper and for magazines and all of that. But I preferred to do it behind the scenes. And the Twitter and the conversation that I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't sit in a coffee shop without people coming up to me and wanting to discuss the trial.
Does it still happen? Do people still recognize you from?
Absolutely, and people come to me because of it still, even after all these years.
Wow.
I was running singles programs in America, and the one trip I went and I was so happy that I'd escaped, and thought like I'm going to have respite from this Oscar trial. And then I was asked to speak at a shul. And I went over time, and I thought I'm going to be in trouble. It was in New York. People are not patient, but they didn't seem to mind. And then when I finished, the rabbi said, there are a lot of lawyers in the Kehillah. Do you mind discussing the Oscar trial? And I thought you can run, but you can't hide. It was everywhere.
Just following you everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. How long ago was that?
It must have been about 15 years ago.
Wow.
No, maybe not so long. Maybe about 10 years ago. I can't remember.
Yeah, it makes sense because I was in South Africa already. I remember hearing about it. Yeah. I find that so often people like have a hard time saying, you know what, this person, or like in a divorce, people to just say, you know what, he was abusive, or you know what, this, it's always like, but it takes two to tango, and I'm sure she had her issues, and they try and, again, minimize the abuse and make it sound like the victim actually had more of a part in it than they really did.
That's what I'm saying. I think it's, people want to feel good about themselves. So they want to believe, you know, that they're just nice people and they see the good in everybody, and they think that everyone's a mixture of good and bad, which is true. But some
sure
people, the good is more hidden than in others. You know?
There's higher percentages of bad in some than good.
Well, some people can't access the good in them. So even though there is good in them, they can't access it because of their own experience growing up, that the world is so threatening for them that they're in a constant adversarial stance, you know, in the world. They cannot allow themselves to be vulnerable, and they have to always be top dog in every situation, you know.
And why do you think therapists have a hard time saying to someone, this is abuse, when it's like clear or obvious?
Well, you know, all of these questions have got multiple answers, but I think the first thing, in order to be able to call something for what it is, you have to have a very sound theoretical background. So if you actually don't know all the subtleties and the dehumanizing practices and the, you know, micro expressions and passive aggression and all the ways that abuse manifests, you actually can't pick it up. You know, you have to have the language and the concepts.
So is abuse usually in the subtle, obviously not physical or sexual abuse, that's a bit more obvious, but with emotional abuse, do you find it's more in the subtle things, and that's why people...
It's both. But abuse never starts out overtly. Right. Everything always looks wonderful at the beginning, and abuse always happens insidiously. And you've got to be able to pick up those insidious signs. And also there's a pattern, you know. Tolstoy at the beginning of Anna Karenina said all happy families are alike, and all unhappy families, you know, are unique, you know, after their own fashion. And I think he was wrong. I think that all unhappy families and all abusive people are very much the same. Really? The script, you know, is very predictable. It's very obvious because there's a rigidity. You know, it's what we call, you know, Balegaiva. And happy people are all unique because
they express it differently.
But also because they don't follow a rigid pattern. Then you see the uniqueness of the individual in every person because they have that openness and that spontaneity and flexibility, like children.
So are all abusers rigid and Balgaivas?
Absolutely. Because a relationship, to be able to have a relationship that is healthy, you have to have a sufficient sense of self, of who you are. You have to be connected to your own inner world. And you have to have security in who you are in order to be able to cross into someone else's world, which means leaving your certainty, leaving your perspective, entering into a realm of infinite possibilities in order to be open to whatever the other person is going to present to you and who they are and how they express themselves. And so you have to be healthy to have a healthy relationship. If you cannot cross that bridge because you are petrified of being vulnerable, then you're going to impose your own will on the world and expect everyone and the world in general to conform to your aspirations, needs, values, perspectives.
So it really comes from being selfish, really. From being only being able to look at themselves and not put themselves
Exactly.
outside.
Well, yeah, only being self-absorbed, self-referenced, that they actually cannot see or empathize or feel, sense other people, and so they kind of perceive other people as objects.
And is someone born like that, or do you think it's because of their upbringing?
That's because of their upbringing. No one's born like that. I mean,
Do you think everyone's born like good, quote unquote, and then based on their upbringing and that they start, experiencing life in a certain way, and that's what makes them become abusive?
Well, we're born good in the spiritual sense, but not in the psychological sense.
Right. We're actually born very selfish.
In the psychological sense, a 2-year-old is a psychopathic narcissist.
Right.
And and that's for survival reasons. It has to be like that. But then, through the child feeling loved and accepted and held and supported, and developing a sense of security within themselves, feeling welcome in the world, feeling lovable, feeling accepted, feeling that who they are is going to make a positive impact in the world. Growing up like that, then you have the freedom to share yourself with the world. And then also, children are taught to have what we call a theory of mind. A child takes another child's toy, and the mother will say, how do you think that other child felt when you took their toy, and teach the rules of fairness. We teach children to say please and thank you, and to greet, hopefully, and to make eye contact. A lot of children are not being taught that these days. But those are all the rudiments of leaving your own self-centered perspective and acknowledging the existence of the other at the most basic level, and then starting to empathize and reach into the world of the other, and also understand that other people's worlds have as much value as your own. Now, for people who become rigid, they never feel that safety, and so they stay at that infantile or toddler phase of only seeing the world as objects for their gratification and not being able to have any empathy.
So they basically never grow up.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if someone grew up in a home where they didn't feel that love and safety, could they, as adults, if they do the work and go to therapy, could they become kind, empathetic people and have healthy relationships? Is that possible?
It's possible. The problem is that there's a built-in flaw in psychotherapy, and that is, to benefit from psychotherapy, you have to be able to trust, and you have to be able to be vulnerable, and to a certain extent to manage humiliation, because it's very hard to sit in front of a stranger and be told where you've gone wrong. So you have to have a pretty healthy sense of self to really benefit from psychotherapy. And so unless someone is really, really committed and understands that they've got to develop this trust and allow another person in, unless they can do that, they can't really benefit from therapy. And to date, there isn't really a known therapy that that works with people who are that rigid.
So if someone is in a relationship with someone like that, that's rigid, self-absorbed, and doesn't have the ability to, empathize with the other person, would you say that they should leave that relationship?
Not necessarily. I think that relationships, are a catalyst for growth. I think that with marriage, there are a lot of factors involved, and children is one of them. And so many, many years ago, right at the beginning of my career, I realized that I have to have intellectual honesty, and I have to come up with a formula that would help me decide when to tell people I think it's time to get out of the relationship, or when they should stick it out.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you know?
And so my formula is that while the relationship is helping you to grow, or if whatever's going on in the relationship is helping you to grow, and it's a catalyst for your own growth, then you can have your own life and be your own person despite the relationship. Then you can stay in the relationship. If it reaches the point where you're frozen, where you're so in defensive mode, where your whole way of being has become nothing more than a reaction to the other person, trying to anticipate their behavior, preempt potential abusive behavior, and where you've kind of bent yourself out of shape to try and keep off the other person's hot buttons, then you're not going to grow. Then it's going to be very damaging to you, and then you have to leave the relationship.
Mm-hmm. But what kind of relationship is that if the person's kind of just living their own life and they're like, okay, this is helping me grow, but they're not having a real relationship where they're having intimacy and connection and love and respect? It's just kind of like, they've gone their separate ways, they're doing their own thing. Would you still say that they should stay in a relationship like that?
Well, if divorce was simple, and if people got divorced and then they could just meet someone else and have a healthy, intimate relationship, that would be one thing. But one's got to weigh up, what's the least detrimental alternative? And that applies to children as well.
Yeah.
And so it's not a simple decision. And if someone can manage to make a life despite their unfortunate relationship, which is, unfortunately, it's more common than we realize that people are in unfulfilling or not unhealthy relationships. Yeah. We're not talking about where there's overt abuse.
Mm-hmm. Just not an ideal relationship.
Not an ideal relationship. And also, people can, when people marry each other, they're often in a very similar psychological growth state. Mm-hmm. But if you have one person who works on themselves, for them, the relationship becomes more and more unhealthy the more they become healthy and grow. Right? And that, obviously I'm talking about in a religious context, where I do believe that shalom is the container of bracha, and machlokas is entropy. It's chaos, it's disintegration, and sometimes you have to have a divorce for shalom. Mm-hmm. In an abusive relationship, divorce is the way to create shalom.
Right.
But if it's not the conditions of someone being frozen and unable to develop in their own lives because of the relationship, if it's manageable, then if people contain their own pain and actually work through their own issues and use the relationship as a catalyst for growth, then that pain stays with them. When people get divorced, and you see this very, very often, you break the vessel, the kli, which was the marriage, and the knock-on effects of destructiveness just go on almost indefinitely in space and time. They affect the previous generation, the next generation, the extended family, the friendship circle, the community. You see in adversarial divorces, the amount of destruction is incomprehensible. And then you see that going on for generations because the children get pulled into the toxic dynamic. They learn to be remorseless politicians, manipulating both their parents. They take that into their next relationship. They have trust issues, all of those things. And so, that fragmentation begets more fragmentation. Whereas...
So in a way you kind of have to predict if the divorce is actually going to be better than the situation of their marriage, or it's going to make things worse. It's like kind of just weighing up the pros and cons of both.
Absolutely.
And trying to choose the least bad option.
Absolutely. Because also then people get divorced and then they have other relationships. I have a little joke, what's got 4 legs and chases cats? Mrs. Cat's and her attorney. So you get into another relationship and that person's having fights with their ex and those children are damaged. And then you have, as I've seen many times, a stepmother who treats her own children and the husband's children differently, even giving them different food.
Wow.
And not letting them sit on furniture and all kinds of things. And so if you don't deal with the issues you've got, assuming that they're manageable, in an effort to fix things, you often just compound things, because also divorce destroys people financially very often.
Yeah.
There are many.
So there's many factors that you have to take into consideration. Many factors to take into account. But obviously, we're not talking about abuse, right? Like we're talking about just relationships that are not great, that they're not thriving in a relationship. Right. Things are just kind of like okay. Right. But when it comes to abuse, then would you say divorce is the only option?
Yeah, well, it depends on the abuse. On the abuse and the level of the abuse, whether it can be contained. It's hard to make rules about these things, but the general thing that I was pointing to earlier was that if one's pain is contained within oneself and the present circumstances, you might have a life of having to deal with this pain, but the pain isn't passed on to other people. Any kind of abuse is insidious. And people always start believing that it's real love and, all of that. And then when the abuse starts, usually like with criticisms or undermining or whatever it is, it starts off subtle. Mm-hmm. And the victim, who's inevitably someone who's empathetic and more adaptive, is going to take responsibility and say, okay, I must try and be more like this, I must try and be more like that. And then they owning all the issues without demanding what they need. And then, the other person is going to up the demands constantly. And the abuse is going to get worse and worse. There's a process that can be tracked, and there are actually scales where you can actually see exactly what's happening now and what's coming next. And it's eventually,
a cycle, right? The cycle of abuse.
Well, that's something else.
Okay.
But what happens is that eventually the person who's adaptive is so busy adapting that they lose their sense of self, and then they don't know that they're in an abusive relationship because they've lost touch with their own experience, with their own needs.
Because it happens so slowly that they don't see
and it happens so insidiously, yeah. And also, when you're an empathetic person, empathetic people in general tend to take responsibility. I saw a study that said that empathetic therapists, when their clients are successful, they attribute it to the client. And when the clients are not successful, they attribute it to themselves.
Wow.
And that's what happens to empathetic people in relationships. So it is only an outside person who can help you to track what's going on, And people forget who they were before they got into the relationship.
Yeah.
And when people come out of the relationship, it can take a lot of time for them to actually get reorientated and get back to their old selves because they've almost forgotten who they were.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. So if someone feels like they might be in an unhealthy or abusive relationship, what do you suggest that they do? Should they speak to friends and family, or is it better if they go to a psychologist?
It's definitely better to go to a psychologist because friends and family are always going to have agendas, and you never know what that agenda is. Sometimes the agenda is to get you on your own because you were, someone, a sibling or whatever, has liked it when you were on your own. Or it could be that they want you to stay in the relationship for whatever their reasons. There are a myriad of reactions that friends or family could have. But that doesn't mean not confiding in friends and family, because often people confide in friends and family and discover that the friends and family knew all the time. And we're just being discreet and not wanting to be destructive. But then there's a lot of support, once you realize that people have known all along.
And maybe also that's kind of the first step, when you open up to someone close to you, and then that person says, I think you should go see a therapist.
Right.
This is,
Right.
maybe they need someone close to them to say, listen, this is worse than you think it is, and you need an opinion.
But I think the important thing about a therapist is that they don't have any agenda. They have no investment in outcomes, hopefully.
Yeah.
And so a therapist can really help you to go where you want to go and not where they think you need to be, hopefully.
Yeah. Okay. And are there any types of abuse where it's if this happens, divorce is the only option? There's no fixing, there's no nothing. Is there anything where it's just
Well, any divorce any abuse could lead to that. Obviously, where there's physical abuse, I had one case where I fundamentally got a woman off murdering her husband. Wow. Because of abuse, and
the husband was abusive.
The husband was abusive, and
she just wanted to get rid of him.
Well, he was passed out drunk, and she murdered him while he was drunk. And I actually used, based on a discussion I had a year previously with my father-in-law, on something called the den of a road ape, that if someone's threatening your life, you have to protect your own life, even if that means taking them out.
Wow. So the abuse was that bad that she...
Well, the abuse was that bad that basically it was going to be a matter of time.
Wow.
And there's something called the lethality scale, and the lethality scale is basically to predict homicide in an abusive relationship. But it doesn't have to be homicide. It can be accidental if someone's physically abusive. They can accidentally, you can fall and hit your head on the side of a table. But, but even physical abuse, if it happens once and it's contained, that's one thing. If it's escalating, then you have no choice. It's a question of life and death often to just get out. The fundamental issue in any form of abuse is that abusers manipulate the victim into not trusting their own experience, their own thoughts, their own feeling, wow, their own intuition, their own sense of safety. And that is why, especially childhood abuse, is so difficult to heal from, because the victim always feels complicit, that they were complicit in some way, that, because they didn't say no. They don't realize that not being able to say no doesn't mean you've said yes. Those are two very different things. But, often when people are deciding on getting married, the kind of advice they get is advice that actually encourages them to ignore their own internal signals. I've had people who went to the chuppah crying, and, their Rebbetzin was saying to them, don't worry, it's only your Yetzer Hara. And it was a disaster. And so, if people are helping people get married, and especially to avoid abuse, we have to strengthen people's connection to their own inner experience and to understand their own signals. There's something called neuroception, which is what you sense with your body. Someone can be charming, they can be very nice, and your body feels unsafe. But you don't pay attention to it because you are entranced by their charm. But if you pay attention to your body and ask yourself, why am I feeling so unsafe? Because the body knows, And so this is really important in guiding people, and also it's really important in raising children, because one has to interact with children's bodies in a way that makes the child feel that they are worthy of respect, that their bodies can't just be pulled and tugged and, forced to do things, whether it's wash your hair or whatever it is, or people pinching children's cheeks, which gives the child a sense that I don't have agency over my body, that adults or other people
can just do
whatever they want, And so we have to strengthen people's sense of themselves and their right to protect their own boundaries.
Wow, that's crazy. And why do you think people, after they know that, okay, their relationship is really bad and is abusive, say they went to a therapist and the therapist told them, or so many family members are telling them all the red flags, why do people still carry on staying in that relationship, even if they know it's bad for them?
There are a myriad of reasons. The most important thing, I think, is that people have to realize, if you know someone in that situation, you have to be patient and compassionate, because the person is literally trapped. And one of the tactics, the primary tactic of an abuser, is to create such a sort of profusion of love and attention and everything at the beginning. It sets off a kind of addictive dynamic, because deep down we all want that. We want to go back to infants being cuddled and fed and kept happy. That's the kind of intimacy we all long for, and it's very hard to get that in an adult relationship, because we bump up against another fully formed person who's bumping up against a fully formed us. And so to get to that point of intimacy is very difficult. And then someone comes along and seems to just give it naturally. From day one, attentive and responsive, and, remembers little details of what you like and all of that kind of thing.
Is that the love bombing?
That's love bombing. Mm-hmm. So that taps into a very, very deep primal need for that kind of ultimate connection and love, which is really the need for shalom. It's the need to live in a completely spiritual world. And then
so when they're already further on in a relationship, do they kind of hope that the relationship is going to go back to that love bombing stage?
Exactly.
That was so perfect and everything was exactly.
So what happens is the person then works harder and harder and harder to get back to that original state.
Mm-hmm. And that's when they say, no, he'll change and it will be different this time. And
but also the love bomber, the perpetrator, knows exactly how much of that good to give in order to keep the person hooked.
Is this on a subconscious level, or do you think they actually know what they're doing? Or does it depend?
Both. It's not that they have to sit and plan it, because it's already well practiced. That is the person that they've practiced being all their lives. And so it's very hard for the victim to give that up. Plus, because a big part of abuse is getting the victim to not take notice or not believe their own experience. They take on the perspective of the abuser.
So they really believe that they're
I'm worthless, I'm the problem, I just have to work harder, no one else would want me. Mm-hmm. And then when they start waking up, there's humiliation and a sense of failure and a sense of loss, and I've been scammed, I've been robbed. And then how do you face friends and family who you may be alienated, because perpetrators always isolate the victim and always say, this one's not got your best interests at heart. Your sister's always hated you, and that your mother's, whatever. And so they isolate the victim so that they become,
trap them.
Well, also that they become the only source of feedback. right? Because if
then they have no one to turn to when it comes.
Not only no one to turn to, but no one's coming to them and saying you shouldn't let him talk to you like this. This shouldn't be happening. And so the other dimension I want to add is that in an abusive relationship, the victim is always a far more well-developed, accomplished, resourceful person than the abuser. And my understanding of this is because abuse is a theft of power, of dignity, of worth. And you can only steal power, dignity, worth, whatever it is, from someone who's got it. And so you find that...
I feel like that's such a big misconception, because people think that for someone to be a victim, they need to be like a nobody or someone that's like weak or whatever it is. But it's actually the opposite.
It's exactly the opposite. Part of the reason the abuse happens
is that they feel threatened.
Well, there's envy, you know, because basically the other person's good qualities and strengths and resourcefulness mirror their own lacking, and they resent that. So they kind of want to destroy that so they don't have to resent it anymore. That's another way to look at it. So
it's like kids bullying. The reason they do it is because they want it. It's their only way that they can make themselves feel better, is by putting the other person down.
Right.
So it's really the same.
Right. It's taking someone else's power to make yourself feel powerful. And
instead of lifting yourself up, you want to just put them down.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, I mean, when I stand in a courtroom, I see a nursery school. And I just see the bullies and, you know, which is the lawyers as well. You just see the whole playground playing itself out.
Wow.
And all that's changed is the clothing, you know, from little
even.
Superman outfits, they're now in black and white. You know, men and women, I'm not being discriminatory. But you can really see how people are acting out their own issues.
Wow.
And the war that they started when they were little kids, they have continued into adulthood.
Wow.
It's the same war.
So for someone that has managed to get out of an abusive relationship, what's the best way for them to start healing from that? Because like you said, it takes away their sense of self, and they don't even know who they are anymore. They can't trust their own thoughts.
Right. So
how can they begin to heal?
The fundamental hot potato that underlies all negativity in relationships is shame. And another way of looking at an abusive relationship, and all relationships, is there is a power struggle over who's going to hold the shame. And so the first step to healing is actually to start healing the shame. Because the abuse itself causes shame. It makes someone feel inadequate and broken, you know. So even if you didn't feel that before the abuse started, you will definitely feel that after the abuse. And then there's a feeling of, how could I have allowed this to happen? You know, all this, the recrimination and self-blame. And so the healing is really about compassion for oneself. And I always think that the best way to understand and to heal one's brokenness or one's hurt is to imagine all the emotions as children. You know, so if you imagine your embarrassment, your resentment, your sense of betrayal, your grief, all of those feelings as a small child coming in towards you. And how would you react to a small child who is feeling those feelings? And that is how you have to start rehabilitating your relationship with yourself.
So it's all about just being compassionate to yourself.
Compassionate and loving.
Loving.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow, I learned so much from this. And
welcome.
I'm sure people will as well. So thank you guys for watching, and please, God will, see you in the next one.